Blur, The Ballad of Darren, album review. Let's chat about it. Hey friends, what's going on? John here from What's Spinning here tonight to chat about this latest from British rock legends and one of the more consistent bands to ever do the damn thing, Blur. Headed by Damon Albarn, masterminded by Damon Albarn, and since the early 90s, it was bands like Oasis and Suede and Pulp and of course Blur that really were the real heavy hitters as far as the Britpop moment goes. And honestly, Blur is a band that I forget how much they mean to me, and then I'll stumble across their discography again, start listening to everything over again, and it just hits me so hard. They have been so consistent over the years. I mean, yeah, sure, their self-titled debut is not very consistent, but I will say that There's No Other Way is probably one of my favorite singles the band has ever put out. But after that, the band took off in such a huge way. Modern Life is Rubbish is their first true masterpiece. Park Life, it's nearly perfect. It deserves every accolade it's ever got. And The Great Escape, while it's not my favorite album of theirs, it showed them taking a turn for the artsy side, and I always appreciated that. And it also gave us tracks like The Universal. Now, like I said, with the start of this album, we started to see the artsier side of Blur. And I've always thought it was a really great move on their part, because at this time, Britpop is kind of dying, and other bands were kind of really clinging hard to that sound. Blur did not. Blur really opened up the floodgates and tried a lot of different things. Their self-titled album, if anything, I think it's a little underrated. I mean, this album's a little lo-fi at times, it's a little experimental, but it's performed really well, and it's incredibly consistent. Their follow-up, 13, was even more out there, but it was done the right way because it pushed boundaries. It was highly experimental in parts, but there was enough of the familiar when it comes to Blur's discography sprinkled throughout to just keep old fans happy but also show them something new. I've always thought that was such a great move. And even Think Tank, while at the time I was not into it, I've actually come to really enjoy the bulk of what they were doing there. As a matter of fact, the not so subtle nods to world music, etc., would probably go on to be the base for some of his work in Gorillaz, as well as The Good, the Bad, and the Queen. Now, it would be quite a bit of years until we heard from Blur again. I think about maybe 13 years until they released the Magic Whip. You know what? I mean, I'm going to be blunt with y'all. I hated the damn thing. I still don't like the damn album. I mean, they've been in the sort of weirder side of art pop for a while now, but man, I don't know what it was about this album. It just did not hit me the right way. I did not like what the album sounded like, and I don't think it's grown particularly well either. Now, that leads us to this album here, The Ballad of Darren. This is their first album in 8 years, and leading up to this thing, I thought I actually really liked the singles, and overall, while this isn't, I don't think going to go down as one of Blur's best albums, it's still a really damn good one. This album's 10 tracks and just over 30 minutes. It's pretty slim and trim, but there's a lot to really love here. This album starts off with the ballad, and like its title suggests, it's a pretty lovely ballad. I'll say it now, this album is very ballad heavy. There's a lot of very heartfelt and dreamy and emotional numbers here, and this is not a bad one at all. It's classy, it's lush, it's charming, it's a real beautiful statement to start the album on. I mean, yeah, I'd rather hear Blur playing with a little bit more energy, but hearing Damon's performance on this track and just how incredibly heartfelt it is, it makes this a wonderful start. St. Charles Square here really does stick out on this album, but not in a bad way at all. I think in a really good way, because it sounds like, a very true to form Blur track. It's got that crunchy, off-kilter riff and this freak out of a chorus. It's great. It's a blast and a half, and honestly, I love so many of the ballads here, but I needed a track like this to just break it up a little bit. It's a great single all around. The same goes for Barbaric. This one has a little oomph to it. It may just be my favorite track here. I mean, at first I was slightly less interested in the less organic sound of this track, but honestly, it does the sound a lot of justice. It's free-spirited, it's upbeat, and a lot of fun. I mean, as far as that classic Blur sound, you are not going to find much more than this on this album. It's incredibly charming, and Damon's performance is just a blast. I do really like Russian strings as well. This is a very laid-back and spacey jam. It almost reminds me of like the sound the Arctic Monkeys have been working with for their last 2 albums. It's very artsy and sweet and bluesy. It's a great sound. I would even go as far as to say it's one of my favorite deep cuts here. I actually think this could have been a single. I mean, just realize you're getting into some pretty far out territory. This is far from Blur's original sound, and I can't remember a time where it's ever come off this tragic, but I love that. My only issue is here, when these ballads flop, they don't just flop a little, they flop hard like the Everglades. I mean, very clearly, this album is emotional and very artsy and very heartfelt. But then we get to the Everglades for Leonard. This track is so unbelievably phoned in, it doesn't progress, not one bit. Because of that, everything around it falls apart. And Damon just sounds bored, and it's a shame because lyrically this track is still pretty beautiful. Goodbye Albert had a ton of just really serious potential as far as I'm concerned. This instrumental is actually awesome. It's airy, it's sweet, it's just so charming. But lyrically and vocal wise, once again, this is a no, man. This track is just such a letdown. I mean, this album as a whole, you know, it's been very sleepy-eyed, it's been very dreamy, but then we get to tracks like this, and it's just, God, it's so boring. And The Heights, I mean, as a finale, I just think it's really a letdown. I mean, truthfully, the stripped down instrumental and the pounding drums do a lot for me. I think that's a great sound. But Damon just doesn't sound invested in this track. I feel like the previous track, Avalon, would have been a much better finale to this album. Outside of that, though, I still think it's still a very good album, and I think that Blur has no reason not to be very proud of this recording. Like the Narcissist, for example. This was the first track here that I heard, and I truly loved right off the bat. It just has so much heart to give. Damon's performance is so incredibly somber. I love this track. This sounds to me like it should be like a mission statement for this era of Blur. I mean, I can't help but get a little teary-eyed with how emotional this track gets. It's also got this painfully real nostalgia that just like hits so hard. Faraway Island I do really love as well. It's got an old school singer-songwriter vibe to it, almost like a Harry Nilsson. And you know what? It's really well done. It's dreamy, it's surreal, it's got this sort of sense of reality just staring you directly in the face. It's a great track, and Avalon late in the album is one of my favorite tracks here. I love the sense of regality to this track and just how epic it gets. The subtle acoustic strumming, the backing strings and horns, the guitar solo, the bluesy elements. There's a lot going on this track. It's a really tight-knit package though, and it's really beautiful. I think this would have been a great finale to the album. Yeah, this is a very, dreamy, very ballad-heavy album from Blur, but I don't think that's a bad thing because they do it all with heart. They do it all with a ton of emotion that is just staring you right in the face. The performances are super heartfelt, super charming, super tender, and when they do break out a jam that kind of freaks out a little bit and puts a little energy in, they even pull off that classic sound to an extent as well. There's nothing wrong with this album. I mean, I wish it was a little bit longer, and I wish they took another risk or two, but the ballads here are very charming. They take up the bulk of this thing. It's a short and easy listen. Yeah, Blur have no reason whatsoever not to be very proud of this recording. I think it's a very decent album. I'm feeling a decent 7 on this thing, but let me know what you all think down below. If you liked the video, be sure to give us a like, give us a subscribe, and let me know down below what you would like for me to chat about in the future. And until next time, have a great day, friends.